Patch 13.3 is live. This is the first patch of 2025, and I'm uploading this video quite a bit later than usual because I've been busy developing for TFT Flow. I have two new features. Number one, we now have an automated changelog that you can see all of these different changes that I make to every single composition. Previously, this was manually managed. To be honest with you, it's probably a little bit too detailed right now, so I'll probably make a simplified version in the future and allow users to toggle back and forth. But that's the first feature. And then the second feature is we now have composition pages, which show you all the information you need to know about a composition, as well as all the flowcharts that it belongs to in one nice, easy to access place. You still have access to the team builder, so if you want to move things around, or if you just prefer the larger view for it, where you can kind of just move around like this, then you can still do that. But that's what I've been working on with TFT Flow. Let's talk about the patch here. So this is the patch that's getting hailed as one of the most balanced patches of all time. There's still some good things, but you have a lot of different options that you can play around. You can play around reroll, you can play around AD, you can play around AP, you can play around fast 8, you can play around fast 9, kind of. You still have to high roll for that. But you still have your S tier conditions, so you still have like the Trundle Hero augment. There's still some artifacts that are good, still some emblems that are good. If you have a lot of items into scrap, that can be quite good, as well as some augments here that can be quite good. So the meta still has S tier conditions. It's just that your default lines in particular, there's nothing egregious like Chem-Baron from last patch. All right, the first composition I want to talk about here is Sorcerers. I believe this is the most controversial composition of set 13 in terms of when to play it and how to play it. Not in terms of like overall controversy. I would say Lone Hero Lux was definitely more controversial. But the reason it's so controversial is, number one, you need to hit LeBlanc. If you don't hit LeBlanc, you're probably going to go bot 4 90% of the time or more, because of the fact that LeBlanc gives you a free 3 Black Rose with Vladimir and Elise. And this is extremely important because one of the things that Sorcerer struggles with is their frontline. The second thing is that you really need to have a Sorcerer emblem, because otherwise you can't get to 8 Sorcerer, and 8 Sorcerer adds an additional line to the trait that says abilities reduce their target's damage by 25% for 3 seconds. So this is extremely important, of course, because we have no frontline, so this increases the odds that you kill their team before they kill yours. And then the last thing here that I've seen discussed is whether you should play solo frontline Swain or play him in a line like this, for example. And so at the very beginning of the patch, people were playing in a line like this. Then later on in the patch, I felt like a lot more people were playing solo frontline Swain. And now I'm sort of seeing a little bit of both. I think you need to have very specific items to make the solo frontline Swain work. So you need to have double gargoyle plus another tank item. And then ideally you're able to get some sort of tank anomaly onto the Swain. If you aren't able to get all of those things, if you don't have all those stars aligned, or if you have a lot of utility tank items, then you should consider the no solo frontline option instead. So there's a lot of discussion in terms of how to play this. The last thing is, should you play this, or should you angle towards this line if you do not have a Sorcerer emblem on 2-1 or maybe 3-2, because you can get that Sorcerer emblem on 4-2. You can also get it on 4-6 with Calling Card on Nami, which is guaranteed to give you a Sorcerer emblem because you can't get an Emissary emblem. So there are a lot of ways to get that Sorcerer emblem later in the game. Also, Frying Pan off of one of the carousels can also get it for you. So there's a lot of ways to get it. So I've seen discussion back and forth. Some people think you should take the chance that you get it later on in the game. Other people think that you should only angle towards this line if you already have the emblem guaranteed on 2-1. So just be mindful of the fact that there's a lot of discussion related to this. I don't think that this is solved. The one thing that is solved, however, is you want to play 8 Sorcerer and you want to hit LeBlanc. So if you're looking to play the lottery a little bit and you want to angle towards that, just be mindful of that. If you're not being successful with this particular comp, it's because you don't meet those 2 conditions. In fact, I even have down here, if you miss LeBlanc, FF, go next. It is what it is. But that's mainly it for Sorcerers. All right, next up we have Experiment Twitch. This is the big winner for this patch. They reduced the mana for Twitch from 60 down to 40. They also buffed this anomaly for Twitch that went from every 3 attacks to every 2 attacks. So there's been a couple of changes here that have made the comp a little bit stronger. This is the standardized version with 5 Experiment. Your splash units are Elise, Vi, Jace, and Caitlyn. You can easily replace Jace with any of the 6 costs, so Mel or Victor. If you're able to find Warwick, you can replace the Zyra. Then you could still play your 5 Experiment. Vi Vi doesn't have to be Vi. It can also be Mordekaiser in this slot as well, if that's something that you're able to find upgraded and maybe you're struggling to find Vi. You can also play Vi as a carry if you want to in this comp. So there's a couple of options available in terms of how to fill those remaining slots, but things get really interesting when you get something like Bronze for Life here. So Bronze for Life, you actually reduce the number of experiments you play down to 3, and there's a couple of different ways you can approach this, but the main idea is, of course, you're trying to fill out your trait web as much as possible. So now you're going to get that Mordekaiser on the board, you're going to get Mbessa onto the board. There's also a TF board if I could find that. So yeah, you can also play around TF, and then you could just fit as many 6 cost as you want. Of course, realistically, you're not going to have every single one of them. Another option here is you can play around Rumble plus Rel. This is a common package when you want to get a Conqueror onto your board, and then you could play Gangplank as your form swapper, which will give scrap to the Rumble. So you still have a lot of traits active here. So you have a lot of options for how to play Bronze for Life Twitch. And then the other option here that makes this comp S tier is Experiment. So if you get the Experiment +1, you can throw that onto Elise, and you can now drop out of your Zyra and play Victor instead. That's if you're not able to find Warwick. If you are able to find Warwick, then you could play 7 Experiment, which is quite strong. All right, next up we have Rebels, and Rebels are the same as they've always been, which is that you need to hit Jinx, ideally Jinx 2, honestly. Even if you just hit Jinx 1, it's not enough. So you need to win streak early or have a lot of econ. You usually need to be ahead of the rest of the lobby, and you need to have a good Rebel opener to consider playing it. So there's a lot of conditions here compared to other default lines. Honestly, I'm considering removing this from the default lines on the website just because of how conditional it feels like it is. Even though there's not a specific condition behind it, it does feel like you need to play this from a high roll spot. So this has been the same for a while here. You play your 7 Rebel units, you then pair those Rebel units usually with an Ambusher for your Jinx. Echo in particular on this patch is quite strong. You can also go a Sorcerer with your Zoe. This could be either LeBlanc or Nami. You can play around 6 cost here in your filler slots. And then, of course, the benefit of having the Rebel emblem is you now have access to even stronger units because you get to drop out of one of your Rebel units. So you have quite a few options here when it comes to how to play the composition in terms of the remaining units, but ultimately it all comes down to that Jinx. When it comes to Jinx anomalies and itemization here, if you're able to get her before the anomaly round, I like something like the finisher on her just because it helps her execute the backline. Nothing Wasted helps her get to that 3rd cast sooner. Power Absorption makes that 3rd cast stronger and also just scales with her crit. There's a lot of different artifacts that can be quite good on Jinx, the best one being Mana Zane, again just because it gets her to that 3rd cast quickly. Also Sniper's Focus is completely insane on her just because it can just one-shot the backline. So yeah, in general, Rebels kind of the same as it's always been. You need to play around being able to hit Jinx. If you don't hit Jinx, unfortunately, bot 4. All right, next up we have Sentinel Academy. There's a couple of ways that you can play this. So the first way you can play it is you have 6 Sentinel, and then you play Heimer, Corki, and Ezreal in the backline. You can replace Corki with Jace if you have an equivalent star level for Jace. So Jace 1 better than Corki 1, Jace 2 better than Corki 2, but Corki 2 is better than Jace 1. You can also play, if you have a Sentinel emblem, which is not worth taking an augment for, you can play all 3 carries in the backline with Heimer, Jace, and Corki. But increasingly what I'm seeing a lot more of is the Academy version, where you drop down to 4 Sentinel and you play around 5 Academy. The reason this says 6 Academy here is we have the Academy emblem. You do not need this though, right? So there's 2 main ways to play it. You can play around the Sentinels or you can play around the Academy version. I have seen increasingly more often the Academy version just because it gives you additional items and you're able to play this triple carry plus tank in the front line. And that's only possible because of the fact that you have all of the Academy items to fully itemize at least 1 unit overall because you get 3 items for free. So that's something to be mindful of. The other thing to be mindful of here is there are some other augments that you can get that are kind of interesting. The first is the Singed Hero augment. This is doing okay in the stats. It's not great. It's not something I would angle towards, but if you had 3 Singes on 2-1 and you had a BT plus a Rod, for example, then this is definitely something that you should be looking out for. The other thing that's interesting here is Category 5 Ezreal. So if you get Category 5 offered on 2-1 and you have Runons especially as one of your Academy items, this is something you should definitely consider leaning towards just because Ezreal procs the ability twice, or procs the the Runons twice on his ability. And the other thing is, of course, you have a lot of different units that you can put these Runons onto if you have it as your Academy item, and you just don't play around the Heimer in this instance. So you have a lot of options here around how to play the board. It's no longer just about Heimer like it was before, and you could play both AP and AD, which is part of what makes this so interesting. The last thing I want to mention here is when it comes to anomalies. So you have your standard Heimerdinger anomalies with mana anomalies, as well as I actually would go against damage amp here. I need to change this on the website. Something like magic training, something that gives you AP is good here because Academy gives you damage amp. And then the other thing that's interesting is with Corki in particular, center of the universe. If you put a center of the universe anomalized champion in the middle of your board, it's going to AoE the front line of the enemy's board, which can be quite effective. All right, next up we have Enforcers. So Enforcers kind of fill in the role that Emissary Flex did during last patch, which is that if you get melee AD bruiser items or backline AD carry items, most of the time you're going to angle towards this line, even if you don't have the Enforcer +1. You're looking to play around Vi 2 as well as Caitlyn. Caitlyn 1 is very strong, so if you're able to find her in stage 4 on level 8, you're probably going to top 4 most of the time. There is an augment here that will give you a Caitlyn and an Ambessa called Martial Law. Definitely worth considering picking up because you can easily play Ambessa on the 6 Enforcer board, and being able to find Caitlyn is one of the important win conditions or top 4 conditions for Enforcers. When it comes to your Vi anomalies, invisibility is good. This is like an Edge of Night. You also have Stone Skin and Bulwark that make your Vi way tankier. You have Last Chance that revives the Vi. There's a lot of builds here that you can consider. When it comes to the artifacts, by the way, you might want to consider playing Ambushers instead, but this is mostly if you get that artifact later in the game. Here are some artifacts that are good on Vi. When it comes to Caitlyn itemization here, you're looking to itemize her quite similar to how you would itemize Jhin in set 10 if you did play set 10. So you want a mana item, i.e., and then either a damage amp item or an AD item. And then the last thing of note here is that if you are able to get that Enforcer +1, you're looking to always play 8 Enforcer. So you can go ahead and throw that onto a Rumble and then flex in a 6 cost. Or if you don't have the 6 cost, you can just go ahead and play your Rumble plus Savika and then all of your Enforcer units, and that could be quite good. All right, next up we have Vertical Scrap. So there are two major changes they made for this comp. The first is that the duration of the shield went up from 20 seconds to 24 seconds. If you don't know, in the first patch it went from 30 seconds down to 20 seconds. So they're bringing that back a little bit, which is a big deal. And the other thing is they buffed Echo. They reduced his mana cost, and he's quite a good unit now. So you want to prioritize putting items onto Echo, arguably even over Corki at this point. Another thing that's kind of interesting here is when it comes to optimization, tier on Echo, very good, guaranteed to be a Hodge. Belt on Corki is very good because it's guaranteed to be Guardbreaker, which is one of his best items. When it comes to your anomalies here, Attack Expert is good on Corki. Damage Amp from Comeback Story is good on Corki. Also, if you get something like Center of the Universe, you can center the Corki on your board. When it comes to Echo, Last Chance is completely broken, and anything that gives him resistances is quite good, especially when you factor in the shield that he gets from Scrap. Those resistances get multiplied by even more. So I would argue, actually, in this case, the resistances are probably worth even more than Last Chance. So I'll probably need to change this in the future. So just be mindful of the fact there's a lot of really good options when it comes to your anomalies. And then when it comes to your S tier conditions, you're looking to get as many items as possible. So anything that gives you items, whether it be a portal or an augment, something like Trait Tracker can be quite good. Over Encumbered, Buried Treasures. Also getting that Scrap +1 counts as an additional item, and it makes it easier for you to play higher quality units. So let's look at those boards with the Scrap emblem. The first iteration here is where you're able to play Victor instead of Powder. And then you also have this option over here, which is kind of an extreme thing. You're probably not going to find 2 6 costs in a lot of cases, but it demonstrates that playing 2 Echoes is actually one of the strongest things you can do. I have a priority list over here where you have 6 cost, least, double Echo. Very, very good. You also have this discussion of Vi plus Loris versus Alawi. So you have this Alawi version over here where you can look to play Alawi plus a high quality unit like Savika instead of looking to play around Loris plus Vi. This really just depends on the upgrades that you're able to hit. So you have a lot of options when it comes to Scrap. The big thing to keep in mind is that you're looking to play this when you have a lot of items. One last thing, by the way, one last piece of tech is that if you have a space in your front line, you can move Corki up to the front line. Don't do it, obviously, if you don't have a space. You don't want to congest your front line for no reason. But if you do have a space in that front line, which I think we have right here, you can see that the Corki got moved up. This is to make use of the Scrap shield. All right, next up we have Urgot Reroll or Urgod. The main thing with this is that this is a comp completely 100,000% centered around a singular unit. Every single decision that you make is centered around trying to make this Urgot as strong as possible. That means all of your itemization decisions, all of your augment decisions, all of your anomaly decisions, everything is centered around trying to make Urgot as strong as possible, since he is the primary tank for your entire board and he is the primary damage dealer for your board. So let's talk about a couple of things here. First, let's go into itemization. So standard itemization is your BT Titan Sterix. That's if you have absolutely zero special conditions. You're looking for ideally Innervating Locket or Death's Defiance as your best artifacts, with Innervating Locket being by far the best one. And you're looking to replace BT with these artifacts, right? Because they provide the healing instead. You still want the resistances from Titans. You still want the additional HP as well as the attack damage from Sterix Gauge if you're able to get these artifacts. If you are able to get an augment, Unleash the Beast, then triple Sterix is the best thing you can get. Another really good artifact here is Mittens, and you can replace Sterix with this. You can actually replace any of the 3 items in his build with Mittens, but I believe the best one to replace here is your Sterix. And then when it comes to Radiant items here, because again, we're trying to make this comp as strong as possible, we're trying to make Urgot as strong as possible, Radiant Refractor is actually quite good in this comp, and you can either upgrade Titans or Sterix. I believe in the stats, Titans is slightly better, but if you theory craft, a lot of people seem to think that Sterix is better. I don't really know, so you can really go with either one. I've seen challenger players do both. I personally just trust the stats, so I would personally go with Titans. When it comes to your anomalies here, you're looking for resistances on the Urgot, so that's something like Bulwark or Stone Skin. I've also seen invisibility be quite good. That's like your Edge of Night. There's actually a lot of options that are quite good, so Last Chance also seems really good on the Urgot. You have Deep Roots I've seen people do, Fortified, Giant Sized, Hunger for Power if you have a good unit to absorb something like Cooking Pot into Nunu, for example. You also have Diving In that I've seen people use, Knockout. There's a lot of different anomalies here that are acceptable. Be mindful of that. The last thing I want to mention is that you do not need to have Tristana 3. Most of the time that's going to be the case, but there are instances where maybe you hit Urgot way earlier than Tristana. In those cases, you should just be looking to push levels and play around Corki instead. All right, next up we have Smeech Reroll. This is the last of the default lines I want to talk about here. And the reason we transitioned from Camille Reroll over to Smeech Reroll is the buffs that they made to Echo, where they reduced his mana, has made this unit completely broken. Okay, so this unit is actually doing as much damage as the 3-star ambushers, and as a result, it's kind of a waste of gold to roll on level 6 in a lot of instances, and you'd feel a lot better just rolling on level 7 and increasing the probability that you're able to hit Echo, especially considering that the absolute highest cap for this comp is usually just playing double upgraded Echo. So that's something to keep in mind here, is that Echo is completely broken. The reason we switched over to Smeech Reroll instead of Camille Reroll is because we really want as many Echoes as possible. Now, when it comes to Smeech itemization, the standard is to have double healing plus Titans. There are a lot of different artifacts that are quite good here. So you have Prowler's Claw, Death's Defiance, as well as, I believe, Silvermere Dawn. If I come back over to here, you can see a Silvermere Dawn build with double healing. So you have a lot of options here on Smeech when it comes to artifacts, as well as standardized builds. If you get something like Radiant Refractor, then Radiant Hodge can be good. When it comes to anomalies here, invisibility is good. It's like having an Edge of Night. You have Comeback Story, Last Chance. On Echo, you're also looking for something like Last Chance, as well as the things that give him resistances. Also, if you're able to get a Firelight Emblem onto Garen, that can be quite good. The big thing I want to note here is that Echo is very strong, and if you're able to build 2 upgraded Echoes, that's like the ideal final board for this comp, so something like this can be quite good. And also, of course, you can look to play around 6 cost in the late game by dropping out of the Loris, but mainly here we're looking for the double Echo board. The first conditional comp I want to talk about here is the Trundle Hero augment. I think this is heavily underrated. I think this is an S tier composition. I think this is an auto take as long as you have at least a couple of Trundles before you pick it and have some decent items. If you look here, it's really easy to get best in slot on Trundle just because it uses 6 different components. So you have sword plus cloak, you have chain plus bow, and then you have tier plus glove. So that makes it a lot easier to get your best in slot because you don't need multiple swords, you don't need multiple bows, you don't need multiple removable gloves. You need 6 different components. That makes it more straightforward. There's also a lot of artifacts here that can be quite good. So Prowler's Claw, Spectral Cutlass, Radiant BT if you get something like Radiant Refractor. There's also these range-based builds if you're able to get Sniper's Focus, Rapid Fire Cannon, or Fishbones, which again, most of the time is not going to happen because you have to use your first augment on the hero augment, but still worth noting that it has decent stats. When it comes to your anomalies here, of course, getting the 4-star Trundle is probably going to be your best option, but you also have things like Invisibility and Last Chance that are also quite good. And one thing of note here is that this comp is a little bit different because even though we're playing around 6 Bruiser, we're actually not playing around Twitch in the backline. If you look at the stats on Twitch, it's not that good, and I imagine part of that has to do with the fact that you're looking to get the scrap onto your Trundle. Just getting that slight shield onto him can be valuable, but in general, it is kind of interesting that in this case, you're actually not looking to play around Twitch in the backline, although I'm sure you could if you had a good spot for it. The other thing of note here that's kind of interesting is that because you're so focused on making this Trundle as strong as possible, you actually don't want to take something like a Bruiser Emblem from your augment. Now, still getting a Bruiser Emblem is quite good because it allows you to drop out of one of your crappy Bruisers here and play a 6 cost instead, for example, but you're not really looking to do this unless you get it from outside of your augment because you want your augments to contribute to the combat power of your Trundle. So be mindful of that. You're not looking to do anything other than make the Trundle as powerful as possible. All right, the last thing I want to do here is I want to go through some of the remaining conditional compositions, starting off with Bruiser Twitch. So obviously this is conditional on having the Bruiser emblem to be able to put onto Dr. Mundo, or if you're able to find Warwick, you can put it on Warwick instead. If you don't have a Bruiser emblem, this comp is a lot weaker because you can't play Jace or Victor in the backline here over Trundle, which makes a very big difference. So generally do not recommend playing this unless you have the Bruiser emblem. Then we have Black Rose Dominators. So Black Rose Dominators is a comp that was a standard of last patch, and now still some people play it as a standard, but I've seen increasingly it's not as strong as it was before because they nerfed the early game by nerfing Ziggs. They also nerfed Silco's Best Anomaly, Nothing Wasted. So generally speaking, I have seen this be a lot weaker than it was before. There are still circumstances where you might want to look to play it. For example, if you have the emblem, if you have Mana Zane for Silco, if you have Bronze for Life, then you can play some of the Bronze for Life iterations, or if you have Pumping Up, that's also quite good with this comp. So if we look at some of those Bronze for Life boards, for example, you can see you can get quite a few traits active here. So this was actually the standard for Bronze for Life last patch, and now it's moved over to Twitch, but you can still see circumstances where Bronze for Life Silco can be quite good. We also have Quickstriker Reroll, so this is now completely conditional, in my opinion, on being able to hit one of the range artifacts. So if you don't have Fishbones, Sniper's Focus, or Rapid Fire Cannon, generally would not recommend playing this. If you get something like Prowler's Claw, you can consider it, but why not just play Ambushers at that point, unless you have like an insane start for Quickstrikers. Emissary Flex, so I mentioned this earlier, it's kind of gotten replaced by Enforcers. If you have the items that are good for this comp, most of the time you're just going to want to play Enforcers instead. The one exception is if you have a ton of resources, if you have a good early Conqueror opener, and you have a lot of items, and you have a lot of gold, then you might want to consider playing Emissary Flex instead, but most of the time you'd be better off just playing Enforcers. Now we have Watcher Kog'Maw, so with Watcher Kog'Maw, it's not really just Watcher Kog'Maw anymore, you also have Zeri, so I guess it's more accurate to say Watcher Sniper. You're still looking to play this mainly if you get an artifact for Kog'Maw, so if you're looking to play Kog'Maw as your primary carry, you're looking for Lichbane or Wit's End. If you don't have one of these two artifacts, most of the time I would not be looking to play around Kog'Maw here. Gambler's Blade, they nerfed it, it's not as good as it was before. Zanya's is also not as good as it was, not because they didn't nerf it, but it's just not as good as these other artifacts. And then when it comes to Zeri here, there's a lot of ways to build her. Most of the time you're looking to just get Rageblade plus Gunblade, and then you can fill in that last slot with an AD item. You can fill it in with something like IE or Damage Amp. So there's a lot of options here for Zeri. If you have a lot of early game Zeris and you feel like you can play around this, then this is something worth considering. Otherwise, it's not a line that I would consider super important to always angle towards. And then the last thing here is Automata Kog'Maw. This got nerfed really, really hard. I would really generally just not play this at all. This is if you high roll. If you high roll, if you get an early Malzahar with an Automata emblem, then sure, you can consider playing this. Again, this is a Lichbane or Wit's End check. If you don't have one of those two artifacts, most of the time I would not consider playing into this line. All right, that is it for this patch guide. I apologize that I was a little bit later than usual on this one. I'll try to be faster with the next patch guide. I've been very busy with TFT flow. I try to always have something new to show you guys every single patch, although that's probably not going to happen for the next patch, given how close we are to it. We are only 6 days away, but I'm going to continue working on the website. We are getting closer and closer to the point that I would consider feature complete, and then I'm going to start making the website a little bit more optimal, make it look a little bit more professional. There's certain things about it that I'm not a huge fan of. For example, if I go here, I hate this list view button. Okay, this list view button sucks, all right? There's certain things that I don't like about the aesthetic of the website on the main page here. I really like how the team builder looks, but I really don't love how the main page looks, and that's where most people start off at. So I'll be working on some stuff when it comes to the website. You'll still continue to see changes as I go through each of these patch guides, and I appreciate everybody who's been along for the journey, and I'll see you next time.